Welcome to Tell It Like It Is. I'm Gary Polland. This show is a fresh look at politics and public affairs. Here we will give you the real deal, not the bias or spin, or the major media's politically correct or censored opinions they masquerade as facts. When we provide you opinions, you will know it. This show rejects politically correct uniformity. That disease is a terminal threat for our democracy and for our freedom. The major media, which we should now call the propaganda arm of the left, has been showing once again to be involved in covering up the news it doesn't like. This week we now know that the Biden scandal regarding payoffs and the like was in fact real and hidden from the American people. Why? Because at least 10% said they would have changed their vote had they known the true facts about the Biden scandal. But besides the New York Post and Fox News and conservative voices like ours, we get crickets from them and the social media, Google, Facebook, YouTube, you know them. And in the media, they call this the spike. You may not think these things matter to you, but they do, because the decline of media in our country into propaganda organs is a disaster for the freedom of the press and a threat to future free elections for both parties. Now for today's show. And my first guest is Jared Woodfield. Jared is a well-known lawyer, activist. He has been involved in politically related litigation this fall, leading the fight in Texas to stop stealing the election in Texas, like might have happened in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, you know the list. Jared, he also, by the way, served as Harris County Republican Party chairman forever, and then retired from that. And I'm glad to have him on the show today because we have so much happening this week. Again, with the news, Jared, we have, and I first want to talk about the lawsuit filed by Ken Paxton, now joined by 17 other states, directly to the Supreme Court. Tell us what's going on here.
Well, first, thanks for having me on, Gary. It's always an honor to be with you. But it's an exciting lawsuit that General Paxton has filed because it's a case of first impression, meaning it's never been done before. So when you've got one state like Texas challenging actions in other states like Wisconsin or Georgia or Michigan, then there's a provision in our Constitution that allows you to bypass all lower courts and go straight to the United States Supreme Court. So it's a case where you have original jurisdiction there, and that's always been the goal, to get this election fraud issue in front of the United States Supreme Court, to get the issue resolved once and for all. And so I'm proud of General Paxton for having the courage to move forward with this unique and creative litigation strategy. And look, others have joined. We now have 17 other states who have raised their hand and said, count me in, General Paxton. And of course, the Supreme Court, to their credit, has now required the other side to respond, to write briefs. So they are taking it seriously. And I think this is the best chance to undo what I consider to be fraud and illegal votes cast in those 4 battleground states.
Well, and in layman's terms, what the lawsuit is about is Paxton says it's unfair to the voters of Texas who follow the rules for the most part. I mean, there were some worries here that they may have tried to pull the same stunts, but you and your lawsuits and Paxton's lawsuits and others were able to stop it. But it's not fair because we know in these other states, dead people voted, people who moved out of state voted, people who didn't even exist voted ever. And that cheapens the value of our vote. And that's why it's an important case. Now, understanding where the Supreme Court's at, you've had the Democrats telling the Supreme Court in the media they want to pack the court because you're too conservative, even though that's not really true. And other things they want to do that would restrict the court's jurisdiction as a way, I believe, to intimidate the court into not taking actions they really should take. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not they actually hear this. But as I said in my opening monologue, Jared, the future free elections of this country, we're threatened. And by the way, it's not just Republicans, it's also Democrats. Because the cheating that went on, they were cheating in the primaries. Exactly. So Democrats are losing their rights. And not to say that someday Republicans could pull stunts like this too. It's not beyond any of these politicians to do things like that.
Well, I mean, every elected official, whether it be a Republican or a Democrat, should want to have fair and honest legal elections. And so they shouldn't run from the light of day being shined on the process. As we're seeing a whole lot of Democrats doing it, even some Republicans are saying, hey, let's just move on and get along. But at what expense? At what price? At what cost? ultimately the cost would be the integrity of the election system in the process. And if we allow it to happen now, what's going to happen in 2 years or 4 years from now? We're setting horrible precedent. And it goes to what you said earlier. I mean, you've got renegade local elected officials who are violating that state's respective election code and allowing votes to be cast illegally. And when that happens, and a state goes one way based on illegal votes being cast and counted, then that disenfranchises the votes of Texans who cast their votes legally. And that's the whole basis of General Paxton's argument under the Equal Protection Clause.
Here's a question that's interesting. You know, we heard President Trump last spring in the summer talking about massive ballot by mail. It's an invitation for fraud. I mean, you and I agree, and most people who actually think about it seriously agree. So why didn't President Trump and the Republicans do more, kind of like what happened in Texas, to preempt this ability to play shenanigans in the election and wait till after to complain?
It's a great question, because you could see it coming. When we saw what happened in the primary, and you could see politicians and local elected officials posturing to use the COVID-19 pandemic as an excuse to have more ballots cast by mail. And what do we know? We know one thing, and I think everyone will agree, that the majority of voter fraud is committed through ballots by mail. And so in Pennsylvania, for instance, you have a system where 2.5 million absentee ballots or ballots by mail were cast by people who didn't even have to show that they were qualified. And the election code in Pennsylvania makes it very clear that only certain folks can vote in that manner. But local elected officials chose to put it upon themselves to unilaterally modify the election code and allow almost 2.5 million illegal votes to be cast. That would have made all the difference in the world in Pennsylvania.
Well, you're a lawyer. You practice in the courthouse a lot, and this seems to be the new way. And it started when Trump got elected, for the left to attack conservatives, to hamper the ability of conservatives to govern. And to get elected. It's public policy by lawsuit. They have gone into individual federal district courts and get a nationwide injunction, even though that court should not have jurisdiction over the whole country. It should be limited to their area where their jurisdiction is. That would be in the district that they're the judge for, being one. Or these friendly lawsuits that get filed by left-wing interest groups against government entities, like happened in Georgia, like happened here in Harris County. We have a prime example, Jared. We had I called it didn't start out friendly. When the Republicans had control of the Commissioner's Court, we had a lawsuit filed about bail bond practices in Harris County. That was vigorously opposed by the commissioners, but they were willing to listen and work with the other side for true victims. That is, housewife, shoplifting, first offense, kids at home. No, shouldn't be sitting in jail. That's crazy. But instead, what happened when the voters decided in 2018 to vote for Beto O'Rourke and vote straight Democratic, they wiped out the Commissioner's Court Republicans. They wiped up all of our district judges too, and the like, some replaced by some good Democrats and some awful Democrats, to be fair. But then that negotiation that was going on, instead of being run by a Republican majority, suddenly was in the hands of Rodney Ellis. And Rodney Ellis, who, even though he's just a commissioner, he runs the Commissioner's Court. There's no question about that. And they made it, and they decided they make a deal. And they give way more than the other side ever expected to get in terms of bail bonds. And, of course, we've seen the results from that, and that dangerous criminals are released. And I think we now have 71 murders of people released on these low-cost bonds in our courthouse, but they're not done. They filed a second lawsuit, this time on felonies. And we call this the jailbreak, Jared, because their plan was to get 4,000 of the 8,000 out of dangerous felons out of county jail and released on the streets. And by the way, we've already noticed the impact of what's happened with the first consent decree. Our crime rates are off the charts. People don't like what's going on with crime. They need to understand who they vote for commissioner, who they vote for judge, in many instances matters. And so what happened, the second suit, they were ready to cut a deal. And the deal was going to be similar to the misdemeanor deal, but what happened was Senator Betancourt and a group of legislators intervened in the suit to slow it down, and were allowed to intervene. And then Attorney General Paxton got in, and all of a sudden the brakes were applied, and the county commissioners Democrats on county commissioners court could not roll over and play dead to the radical left on this. But that's what's going on, and it's got to stop. It is scary.
Well, and that's exactly what was happening this election cycle with respect to Commissioner's Court. You had a 3-2 majority in favor of the Democrats, working to put Chris Hollins as county clerk. And what did they want to do? They wanted to send out 2.5 million applications to vote by mail to everyone, regardless of whether that you requested it. And the election code makes it very clear that you have to request it first for the clerk to send it.
Well, and also we have a voter roll that hadn't been purged in a decade.
Yeah.
So we have dead people on it, people who have moved. Probably have children on the voter
Right.
rolls like it's happened in these other states. The plan in Texas, I believe, had you not gotten involved, and then later Paxton got involved, but you and Dr. Hotze and your group, if you hadn't done what you did, they'd have stolen Texas.
I'm firmly convinced, and that was the plan all along. The plan all along was send out 2.5 million applications to vote by mail, have your county clerk, Chris Hollins, up there saying, put whatever you want for disability. We're not going to be checking. And then have the ballot harvesters come along and make sure that those 2.4 million votes, at least the Democratic ones, just happen to be mailed in, regardless of whether the individual was qualified. That was the plan. And had they been successful, Texas would have turned blue. I have no doubt about that.
Yeah, and which gives you the point. I think we need some work on our election legislation,
Right.
not to make it more difficult for seniors and others to have a voter ID and shows. We should make that as easy as possible.
And how
They
about
don't have
that
the
other-
money, pay for the ID.
How about the other scheme that they came up with, drive-through voting? Who would have thought that we would have allowed that? People coming in their cars and having multiple people in the car while you're voting, helping and assisting you to vote, actually going on Snapchat and Facebook and videoing yourself while you're voting. I mean, this is the type of election integrity that the Democrats on Commissioner's Court and Chris Hollins were allowing to occur in Harris County. I mean, it's outrageous that way what was going on, and hopefully we'll be able to stop it from ever happening again, whether that's through legislation in Austin or whether it's through the lawsuits that we currently have pending right now in the Fifth Circuit.
Well, I want to see fair elections. I want to see fair elections for the Democrats.
Agreed.
I don't want to see this cheating and scheming, because I think it'll basically end with a secession, a division of the country, which is pretty divided as it is. Okay, we're wrapping up this. Good time flies when you're having fun, Jared. And my second guest, as you know, is Senator Craig Washington, who is someone you respect. Is one of the great,
been around a long time.
Of the last century, one of the great Democratic leaders in the state, and
I
I really miss someone now of his intellect and abilities that serve. I'm trying to draft him.
You got to tell
run
him
for
this.
something else.
When you talk to him, I was a tour guide at the Capitol when he was in the state senator, and he did a famous filibuster there. I'll never forget when I was a law student at
Really?
I was an undergrad at UT working as a tour guide, and I always remember that.
Well, he's good, and we'll be interested in his perspective on what happens and what do we do to get these elections working. But I will say that my comment that I give Trump credit in that he campaigned in the Hispanic and African American communities. Traditionally, Republicans haven't bothered. Big mistake. So I admire Trump for that, and I think that as that community gets more politically sophisticated, I think people will realize that it's important to be in play for both parties, as opposed to just assume you're going to be there for one party.
Agreed. You
Doesn't make
can't.
any
And you can't have
sense.
the Democrats taking African Americans and Hispanics for granted. And I think you saw in the vote totals in this election cycle that Trump made significant inroads into voters in the Hispanic and African American communities, which is a great thing. I mean, there needs to be a competition for those votes based on ideals and principles. In this election cycle, we got a lot closer to that.
All right, how about progress that the Republican Party made among millennials and even younger, the coming generations? Did they make any progress?
Some. I mean, obviously, that's a demographic that we're still working on, and we do have a lot of great folks who are millennials. But at the same time, we need to get our winning message out there. We need to let folks know what we stand for. We can't allow Facebook and Twitter to define who we are as Republicans.
That's interesting. Okay, but what about the idea that conservatives have lost the culture? That we're done. That the public schools are teaching our children to hate America. They're teaching them that socialism is good and the free market is not good. Is that really the problem? It looks to me like it is.
Yeah, well, that's why we got to continue to fight the good fight, as the Bible says in the book of Joshua. And the reality is, we can't give up. And that's why you have so many folks retreating to private schools and to homeschooling, because they see a public education system that is indoctrinating their children in a manner that is inconsistent with their values and beliefs. So that's got to change. And I think if we continue to elect good folks to school boards, which, as you know, serving as a chairman for so many years, is extremely important, that we put good folks in those
school
positions.
board. Oh my God.
Yeah, in those positions.
Well,
back when you were there, it was a little different.
Send Craig to the school. No, I wouldn't wish that on anybody that I like. What about school choice? School choice has been a really popular issue in Florida, for example. The Florida governor, he won that race with African American votes that supported him because he supported school choice, and the Democratic opponent did not. But in Texas, it doesn't seem to have gone anywhere.
And what's shocking about that is they tell us every time it's going to happen. And we have these large majorities and it doesn't. And that's where people say one thing on the campaign trail and do another thing when they get to Austin. They're influenced by the teacher lobby and the teacher union. And that can't happen, because the reality is school choice is vital to the future of all young people. And the African American community supports it overwhelmingly, because you should have a choice. And if a school is failing, you should not be sentenced to that poor school. It's not right for Hispanic, African American, or Caucasian children to be sentenced to schools that are failing. And you should have a choice with your dollars.
And you got to be able to give them, and the parents need to have the means to afford to be able to pay for that private school education if that's what they'd like to see for their child.
Absolutely. I mean, it's all about getting the best education you can possibly get.
Yeah, and then they can. And in fact, I had on a couple of months ago Robert Muhammad. You know, sure, Robert, good guy. And Robert and I was stunned how many issues we agree on, because he's real big on school choice, but he's also big on he's very pro-family and pro-faith as a black Muslim, and I have a lot of respect for him. What he didn't understand was, why weren't conservatives coming into the black community and campaigning on school choice? That you vote for
Great
us,
question.
We're going to bring you school choice.
Great question. That needs to happen. And the question is, why are so many conservatives not even going into the African American community or the Hispanic community? And that's where we failed. And Trump, I think, started to change that paradigm. Trump said, I am not going to surrender the African American vote or Hispanic vote to the Democrats. And he was aggressive about it. And that's how we're going to have to.
He also had some public policy ideas that resonated with some black leadership and some of the black population.
But you've got to share those ideas with the community if you want to have them embrace them and come along to your way of thinking on that issue.
And you got to put money behind the message.
That's
and as you noted in my opening monologue, the mainstream, so-called mainstream media doesn't cover anything. I mean, we'll talk about my favorite newspaper, the Houston Chronicle. The Houston Chronicle, they spiked the Biden story. They spiked one story. They spiked the story about runaway crime, about the abuses in the bail bond system. They like Lena Hidalgo so much. I think they think she walks on water, but they don't give full coverage to this paper, to the issues. And we learned from this last information in the polling that a lot of the American people didn't know about the Biden scandal because of the cover-up.
And that's the problem. What they consider to be the mainstream media let us down. And they didn't educate people on the facts and let people hear the objective facts and judge as they may. And when you don't share those facts and only share one side or one issue, then people aren't educated when they're making their decisions.
Well, exactly. And as a final thought, as we're rolling up on a break, Jared, is this: that if the major media had provided fair and balanced coverage, not bias, fair and balanced, I think that the American people would still have a feeling that Joe Biden is probably a nicer person than Trump is. I think that's probably, they come across with that, okay? And then also, to be fair, he's older and he may have some issues with his age and his abilities because of his age. So that would have been fair and balanced. And then if they want to talk about Trump and his issues, his tweeting, his hitting below the belt, the thing below his fighting weight, etc., okay, fair enough. But instead, Trump got 92% negative coverage, and Biden got about 98% positive coverage, which isn't fair and balanced. And, we can't even agree on what the news is or what's happening in the world. That's a big problem for the future.
Well, Biden received little, if any, scrutiny from the mainstream media. I mean, they allowed him to hide out in his basement most of the time. And when they did question him, they were softball questions. And most of them were questions that had embedded in them something negative about Trump.
Well, but not when they asked him about what ice cream he got.
That's true.
That was a good. I like that question. My granddaughter, who's 3, she likes ice cream. Yeah. She liked that they had talk about ice cream. That's an issue for me. Well, Jared, thank you so much for coming on. We'll certainly have you back as events go forward. Every week is another amazing adventure.
Thank you.
And we'll be back after these messages with State Senator and former Congressman Craig Washington.
During the Cadillac Season's Best Sales event, Ron Carter Cadillac, Houston's only Cadillac to-your-door dealer, delivers 0% APR for 72 months, plus $3,000 bonus cash on both the first-ever 2020 CT4 Luxury Collection for only $449 a month, and the first-ever 2020 CT5 Luxury Collection for just $499 a month, both with only $1 down. Gulf Freeway, just 2 minutes south of the Beltway.
Shop smarter when you shop Ron Carter. Ron Carter Cadillac.com.
I'm Attorney Willie Powles. Allow me to express myself with you. If you've been hurt or injured in a car or truck accident, give me a call and we'll get it fixed today.
Season's best sales event, Ron Carter Cadillac delivers 0% APR for 72 months, plus $2,500 bonus cash on all 2020 XT4, XT5, and XT6. Or drive 2020 XT4 Luxury Collection, only $299 a month. 2020 XT5 Premium Luxury Collection, just $369 a month. And first ever 2020 XT6 Premium Luxury Collection, just $399 a month. All for 39-month lease with just $1 down.
Ron Carter Cadillac.com.
Have you been injured in an 18-wheeler accident, truck accident, car accident? Was someone texting and ran into the back of you, not paying attention? It doesn't matter what it is. Give me a call, Attorney Willie Powles. We'll fix it today. The number is 281-881-2457. Again, that number is 281-881-2457. We'll fix it today. Call Attorney Willie Powles.
Welcome back to Tell It Like It Is. In the second half, we have the honor today of having a nice, frank discussion with former state senator, former Congressman Craig Washington. Craig has been a longtime friend of mine. He's a Democrat I've respected the entire time I've been in Texas. He accomplished so much and was respected by both sides of the aisle. I guess it may have been a throwback era. Craig, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Gary. It's good to see you, my brother.
When you were serving in the state legislature and an important state senator, you were able to get things done working across the aisle on a regular basis. That's my recollection, right?
Yeah, well, we work together. I mean, one hand washes the other, and they both wash the face.
So what has changed from when you were a leader in the state Senate to the highly partisan era we live in today?
That's a really good question. I wish I knew the for sure answer. When I preface my remarks with "I believe," that means I'm guessing. I hypothecate or think. When I make a declarative statement, that means that I know. And I think that we've come to a time where there's a distinction between legislating, whether it's on the city, county, state, federal level, and politicking. We have merged the two terms together so that to the average person who doesn't take the time to think about them they become the same. Politics is the art of getting elected. Legislating is the science of governing. And we have allowed people to put on a charade or a circus in order to get elected. And they don't have a clue about what it takes to do the job that they've been elected to.
And is it fair to say that some of these people don't even care? They want to be, they don't want to do anything.
Oh no, I think most of them don't really care. They haven't given a serious thought to governing. When you hear someone say, on day one, I will do thus and so, you ought to get up and run. It's like someone with their hand in your pocket. They stopped teaching how it becomes a law. You learned it and I learned it.
We did.
Probably either when I was in schools before you're a younger man, they used to have elementary school, junior high school, and high school. And then they got middle school and all that. Somewhere between the 7th grade and maybe the 9th or 10th grade, we all learn how a bill becomes a law. They don't teach that anymore. They don't teach civics. It's after I'm gone and you're still here, you and your children and grandchildren, someone's going to go back and do some research and find out why. We know the how. We don't know the why. I think they dumbed down people so that they could appear on television with a dog in their arms, suggesting that they are kind to animals.
Right.
With red, white, and blue behind them, suggesting that they're patriotic, without ever promising that they're either one. So it has become a popularity contest. They get elected, to get elected, to get reelected, to get reelected. And they don't have the slightest clue about what it takes to do the job and govern. They couldn't be more write a bill for you on their own, and they could fly to the moon under their own power.
So what does that say about the future of our democracy, and not just in Texas, but in the country?
We have to take it back. Smart people like you that really care about governing is the fulfillment of what we as a egalitarian society created a democracy to be, so that we could, in a civilized way, have rules that we would all follow. Because if we didn't have rules, if we didn't have stop signs, imagine what it would be like at an intersection. If people disobeyed red light, yellow light, green light, imagine what it would be like at an intersection. Those things only work because we, as what we call a civilized society, have agreed upon a set of principles. We've agreed that when the light is red, we'll stop. There's nothing to make you stop. If a policeman isn't there, there's nothing to make you stop. So it's because we have a compact that we made with ourselves over the years after automobiles were invented. And you can use it in 1,000 other, in almost every endeavor in life. You can use the same analogy. This system, as it were, only works, Gary, and you know that. You're a lawyer, and a really good lawyer, and you know how to go down and advocate for people and seek justice, because we have a code. We have rules written down, and you, as a law enforcement officer, go down to enforce those laws on behalf of people that you represent. But what if people just said, no, I'm not going to obey that law. I'm not going to obey child custody or visitation or adoption or juvenile cases. I'm just not going to do that. It only works because the majority of us have agreed in advance that we will be governed by that code. Otherwise, there's no need for the legislature to meet.
Pretty scary then, because the civilization kind of sits on this rocky precipice and can go either way, because what you've described, and I've seen it too, is the failure of our education system to educate citizens and what it means to be a citizen and what you're supposed to do.
Right. I believe it was done on purpose. I hope I'm wrong, and y'all will discover it long after I'm gone, or maybe even shortly after I'm gone. But if you dig down deep, we're not educating people the way that we used to and the way that we should. We're not educating the broad spectrum of people. Education has become the vehicle for the few to obtain good jobs and things like that and to better themselves. But education has not delivered what it's supposed to deliver for the masses.
No.
When I was young, they used to say that if the learner didn't learn, the teacher didn't teach. And the learner's not learning.
So the problems with our school system, does that mean that you would support school choice in Texas, for example, to empower parents to decide where their children go to school, regardless of their income?
I don't like to use phrases. I don't like to use things like school choice because it connotes different things to different people. I would support a system going back to Edgewood versus the independent school district case. You remembered when you were a young lawyer.
Yes.
I would support a system that says from each according to his ability to each according to his need. I would support a system where the resources are all put in one pot and divided equally among the children. And it shouldn't matter whether you live in an oil-rich area or refinery-rich area like Pasadena, or you live in La Mesa, Texas, that the quality of education, to the extent that money is a factor in determining the quality of education, it is shared equally by all of us. If that is what you mean by school choice, then by God, I'm for it.
Yeah, I mean,
If you mean a system that has become politicized and used as a hammer by some people and a dagger by others to suggest that rather than making the schools that we all pay for better, we just pluck some of the fruit from it and send them over to a different school system. That doesn't make the school system better. We ought to be about the business of making all the schools. It shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter in a perfect world where you go to school.
Well, a couple of points there. First of all, if you look at historically how the public schools in major cities have neglected minority students in terms of giving them the kind of quality teaching facilities and education and opportunity to be successful, and you tie that into the power of the teachers' unions, which seem more interested in protecting teachers than they are in educating our children. Thus, the fact the teachers' unions want the children to do virtual learning, which, by the way, as you know, probably is a guarantee for poor students to fall further behind their more wealthy counterparts because they're not given that opportunity. And so the idea behind school choice, I call it opportunity scholarships, is to empower parents to be able to make the decisions of where they want their children educated. I think it's, in Florida, by the way, if you're a public policy guy, Florida's had school choice or public opportunity scholarships for years. And it's worked really well, especially in the minority communities, because it empowered these folks who didn't have the money otherwise to have choice to get choice.
You're correct. You're absolutely correct in the overarching part of it. But that, with respect, bespeaks the problem. You shouldn't have to talk about wealthy and poor when you're talking about education. It shouldn't make a difference. That was my point about oil-rich districts and refineries in Pasadena. It shouldn't make a difference. All schools should teach the same thing, the same quality of education. Now, it doesn't have anything to, some people want to union bash about things like that, point the finger at someone else. If we decide upon a basic curriculum that all children, once they start school, whether it's public, private, take the name. I don't like labels. if we take all children who are 7 years old and we decide that this is what they should be learning, this is what they ought to be learning when they're 7. This is what they should already know by the time they get 7. This is what they should know when they're 6. If we make that equal and uniform and enforce the fact that that material has to be taught. Now children come in different categories. I believe that I believe that we are the existence is based upon 3 things. It's based upon genetics, it's based upon environment, and it's based upon experiences. I can't think of anything that molds a human being. There are a lot of things that mold a dent or add to or put gravy on, but those 3 basic components. So all children don't have the same capacity to learn. Those who have a different capacity, whether it's greater or lesser than, should be taught. As I say, if the learner hadn't learned, then the teacher hadn't taught. Doesn't matter whether it's at Deshin or whether it's at St. John's or whether it's the University of Texas or anywhere else. You find people where they are, you measure their capacity to learn, and learning is a result of genetics, environment, and experience. And you teach them, if we're going to live in a civilized society where we all obey and go by certain rules, you have to tell them why those rules exist. They didn't, they didn't go on third base and think they hit a triple. They started out someplace else and they evolved to that point. So back to your point, yes, I'm in, but that's a Band-Aid on a cancer.
Yeah, I
taking money that's a scholarship or whatever you want to call it, Gary, to boost the child who unfortunately, by God's grace, was born to a family that didn't have a lot of resources and grew up in a neighborhood where there weren't a lot of environmentally friendly things going on, is at a disadvantage. But we take the child where she or he is and bring them all to the same level, then they all end up educated and they make intelligent decisions and they make intelligent choices and they make wonderful human beings because God made them all.
There you go. We have a couple of minutes left, Craig, but I wanted to talk about the bail bond reform movement and what has happened in Houston and Harris County. As you know, I think we're now up to 71 people murdered, mostly minority, by felons released on low dollar or free bonds. And you're an old criminal defense lawyer. I still do criminal defense work and believe in the Bill of Rights and people have the right to do things. But as a citizen, I'm concerned that the standards of what should be, who stays in jail and who doesn't, has been totally lost by this national effort that came to Houston and orchestrated by your good friend Rodney Ellis. So do we have a problem here? And if so, what do we need to do about it?
Well, to be honest with you, Gary, I haven't been conversant about that for a while. As you know, I was involved on the tip of the iceberg on that way back when it was in, I think, in Judge Gilmore's court at the beginning stages. I haven't kept up with it, but you and I agree agree upon the fundamentals. That is that a person who is charged with a crime, absent extraordinary circumstances, is entitled to a reasonable bond. And bond is designed not as a means of punishment. Bond is designed to ensure that, just like when I sign a traffic ticket, I promise to appear when my name is called to answer to the charges against me. Now, whatever it takes to make sure that happens is where the rubber meets the road. I sign a ticket and I'm free to go, but I'm arrested, as you very well know, and maybe citizens do or do not know, when the officer stops me for not giving a turn signal or going too fast or whatever. I promise to appear, and that's the lowest form of bond, to make sure that when called upon, I will answer to the charge because it's on the ticket as to what court I'm to be in and what time I'm to be there. Now, as you move up the scale and the greater charges are made against people, then there should be some standard to determine what does it take to make sure the person shows up in court. there's no connection between the fact that a person commits another crime and the amount of the bond. That argument just means that you're saying they shouldn't be let out of jail at all.
And I guess what you're saying, it becomes the other half of the coin, which is preventive detention. That's what you'd call it.
Well, our Constitution says that unless you're charged with a capital offense and the proof is evident, as you very well know, a person is entitled to a reasonable bond. Now, what is reasonable is where reasonable minds, if you use the term,
and then you have the cross currents of public safety versus the right of someone who is accused of a crime, and and people need to remember, as you and I both know, you're presumed innocent until proven guilty. You're not presumed guilty until proven innocent. Well, Craig, our time flies. Our time is up. We enjoyed the visit. I call it your boat hole into some unknown disclosed location in Texas. We will certainly want to visit with you again. Next time maybe we'll send you a TV light so we can see you in a brighter way. But always great. If you thought about writing a book on philosophy, Craig?
I'm writing a book. I'm
good.
18 chapters in on a book. The title of the book is The Craig Washington Roadshow, and it's philosophy and everything. I'm discovering stuff. I'm so busy doing stuff, I didn't write it down. Gary, let me say,
that's great.
I'm grieving about your mother's death.
Well,
you are my friend for life. God bless you. I'll be praying for you and your family. Yes, be well.
I look forward to seeing you again soon, Craig. Take care.
Be well.
Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week at the same time and same place. You can email the show at Gary Polland, that's me, at AmericanStarTV.com. You can get my bi-weekly newsletter, the Texas Conservative Review, read by over 100,000 people around the country by signing up for free at TexasConservativeReview.com. Remember, in the immortal words of President Ronald Reagan, you and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We will preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we will sentence them to take the final step into 1,000 years of a new dark age. I'll see you next week.